Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, especially the live stream. That's why I'm kind of smiling so broadly because it was really fun. We had the most interaction from the chat ever, so really good live stream. We want to shout out our guys, Xander Cade, he was a huge contributor, and also Hyman Roth, W reference to the Godfather Part 2. So yeah, those guys are really cool. And if you want to be shouted out, please make sure you have a channel. But anyways, it was, like I said, it was really fun. But the NBA free agency is well underway. And if you want to hear some extra commentary outside of this episode, check out the VOD of that live stream. It's under the live section of our channel. So, that outside of what we're going to be talking about today. And just as a reminder, we will also be heading out to Vegas on the 7th through the 11th to watch the Summer League games. So expect some content centered around that. But before we get started with today's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast. So yeah, most of this episode is going to be centered around, the free agency recap, our thoughts on the signings and whatnot, winners and losers, things like that. But the first order of business is definitely a dark cloud that has been looming for years and years, and that is Damian Lillard. So he has officially requested a trade out of Portland, and this is something that's been following him throughout his career, especially when they've been out of contention. But he has officially requested the trade. And for starters, one of his two of his destinations that we've heard so far, per Chris Haynes, it was definitely Miami Heat, which is a big one, and the Brooklyn Nets. So, and I think you said earlier that there were some other things that you had heard. So walk me
Yeah.
through that real quick.
Yeah. So also at the same time, we had different reporters mention different teams, that were interested in Lillard. Because some of them reported from the perspective of the teams that were interested in, and others reported the perspective of Lillard.
Mm-hmm.
Say, for example, Woj mentioned, the Sixers, the Clippers, the Nets, they're all interested in Damian Lillard. Whereas, say, like you said with Chris Haynes, he mentioned that the Heat and the Nets are the ones that are pursuing him. And then Shams Charania said that really he's only interested in the Miami Heat.
Right.
David Aldridge also mentioned that as well. Ramona Shelburne mentioned that the Spurs are a team to look out for. I don't know about that one, but not to take out somebody's reporting or anything, but just something worth noting. But it because we got more talk about the Miami Heat, I do feel like that's probably his preferred team. I think
Absolutely.
and it feels like like you said, this was kind of coming for a while.
Yeah. And I guess to really start this off, I guess we should really talk about Miami since they seem to be the favorite in the Dame sweepstakes or whatever. And I feel like they don't really have a lot, to give up, in my opinion. I feel like they're only position value matching salary or whatever would be Tyler Hero, I guess.
I mean, so when we look at, the contracts, I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, we know that Damian Lillard, he makes, a ton of money.
Right.
But the only way, the Heat can really get, to that number is you throw in, say, like Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, some picks. Or if you don't want to give up Hero, you throw in, like, say, Lowry, Robinson,
Sure.
and picks. But the problem is, I don't think Portland would really want that.
They already have 3 guards.
Yeah, and that was kind
And
of
they're
the
young.
difficult. Yeah, exactly. And I don't think Tyler Hero should be the centerpiece of a Damian Lillard trade.
Sure.
And it's not like Miami's picks are going to really be all that good because they've been a consistently solid team that, hasn't really been bad.
And they
And
owe their first round pick, I think, and I think
right.
it's like in 2025 to OKC.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have very
So,
many to give up anyways. Like, because we talked about it before, where, like, I think the Brooklyn Nets have the more attractive package in terms of picks.
absolutely.
But the issue is that with the Miami I think the Miami Heat would give him a better chance to contend. So my guess is that if it is the Miami Heat that get Lillard, I think a third team has to be involved. And
Sure.
that it kind of felt like the Heat were sort of up to something. Just because some of the moves that they made, they lost some guys in free agency, and I guess we can get into free agency soon.
Yes.
But they didn't really add, a ton of guys, right? Obviously they added a couple, right? But they lost Gabe Vincent, right?
Mhm.
Max Strus, they lost him in the sign and trade, right? So they got a trade exception. Then they traded Oladipo to Oklahoma City basically as a salary dump. So they
Right.
kind of lost a number of guys for really nothing. And I just felt like, Miami's a pretty well run organization. And I don't
Yeah, I
feel
agree.
like they would just kind of like, let guys go without having some sort of backup plan.
It
So
was a
there's
plan for
right,
sure,
exactly.
especially,
So I
with Pat Riley at the helm. He's like a
exactly.
mastermind, underrated.
Right. So I feel like it makes sense. It's just I don't think they can really do it with just those two teams. I
Sure.
think they'd have to find a way to send Tyler Hero probably to a third team, right? Which is kind of why we've started hearing talks about maybe he goes to Brooklyn, for example, as the third team, and then maybe Brooklyn also takes on like additional salary, right? Maybe
Right.
Portland throws out like Yusuf Nurkic or somebody like that, but it's kind of an interesting time, for the Blazers, right? Because, we mentioned them in one of our previous episodes, right, as a team that had a ton of pressure going into the offseason. But I really had them sort of as an honorable mention
Mm-hmm.
because my thought process was, it was reported that Lillard's going to meet with the front office, and he's going to, kind of give his thoughts based off of how they do in the offseason. And it didn't even last a day, basically.
Right.
In my mind, I'm like, there's no way that Portland has a chance at putting together a team capable of contending because they didn't have cap space.
It's not
Uh,
realistic.
and they didn't have the flexibility to make trades. And just based off the roster, right, they have a number of young guys
Right.
as well, right? They just drafted Scoot, right? Shaden Sharp last year, have Simons. So it just wasn't realistic, like you said. So
Yeah.
it felt like it was coming. It's just a matter of where does he actually go. I
Yeah, and I
mean,
want to ask you a question.
yeah.
Um, so of the teams that have been reported, and that's Miami, Brooklyn, Philly, San Antonio, and Toronto. I think is the full list of teams.
Paul was also mentioned.
Utah.
I
Yes,
think
you're
I
right.
saw
You're right. I
Utah.
did see that on Bleacher Report. Utah as well. So of those teams that I just spewed out, which one do you think is like the best fit, and also maybe which one is the most likely to happen?
So I think if I'm him, I definitely would rather go east. Just
Absolutely.
because I think the Eastern Conference is definitely the weaker of the two.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I feel like Miami makes the most sense. I mean, obviously, if you go to Philly, you could play alongside Joel Embiid.
Hmm.
But my only question is like the only way that works, I feel like, is that would have to be a trade with him and the other guy who requested a trade, Harden. Not
Right.
that they're traded for each other, but maybe it turns into like a three-teamer where like Harden goes to like the Clippers, maybe Dame goes to, the Sixers, right? I guess it'd have to be four teams then, but you
Right.
know what I mean? So like it'd have to be multiple teams involved in that trade. That is a possibility maybe, but
Sure.
again, it all depends on what is Portland okay with in terms of what do they want back for Dame. Seems like they want young players and picks, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um,
They're in a rebuild.
yeah, but I feel like we've kind of seen this before, where like teams are in a position where it's like, hey, we all want this guy, and then the guy's like, this is the team I want to play for, and then they just end up still going there anyways, right?
Right.
Like Durant, he wanted out. Phoenix was his preferred destination, and now it took him a long time, right? Because it was up until the trade deadline, but he still ended up going there, right? Harden wanted to go to Brooklyn, then he wanted to go to Philly. AD he wanted to go to LA, right? There's not been too many guys that didn't go where they wanted to go. I guess Kawhi's one of them. Um, and I guess Kyrie's probably the other one.
Kyrie counts, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I feel like he's probably going to be headed to Miami, but at the same time, there's never any guarantees because,
Sure.
again, then you have to factor, like I said, the Harden aspect of it in there, right? Because if he wants to be traded, right, maybe there's a way that they can kind of work those trades together. But again, once you start having like more than two teams, right? Once it's three teams, it becomes more difficult because then it's like, what does the third team want? What are they sending out? So, and that's kind of the difficulty. I know
Right.
Hero on excuse me, Twitter, right? He kind of took off, of his bio, Miami Heat guard, right? Not that we read into, what somebody does or says on social media,
Sure.
but just in general, his name has come up so much, and I know Pat Riley was like, "Oh, Hero, we feel like he's, a really big part of our team, even though we got to the finals without him."
Right.
Um, so I mean, like, I just feel like that's probably where it's headed, and honestly, I think that's the best scenario for him because I just feel like if you go west, I just think it's going to be really difficult to, beat out those other teams.
Right.
So I just think go east, go to Miami, go to the team that just came off of an NBA Finals trip without you, right? Now, actually, they've been to two, right? So you
Right.
can go there and maybe you're the guy that puts them over the top, and then they go to a third one and actually win it this time.
Right.
So that's what I'm thinking. I mean, because again, I understand Brooklyn has better assets. I just don't think that they give them a better chance to win.
Sure.
Because it's just like again, who is he playing with? Mikal Bridges, he's good, right? But he probably shouldn't be your second best player.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I
Whereas, like, if
I
you go
agree.
to Miami, you're playing with Jimmy Butler and Bam.
I agree.
Um, but again, I understand why Portland wouldn't want to just give him to Miami just straight up because again, what are you getting back? Nothing,
Right.
really.
Yeah. I agree. Miami's definitely the best fit in my opinion, and probably the most likely. Like
Yeah,
you said, it's probably going to take a lot of work
yeah,
and inner stuff and behind the scenes stuff. Like you said,
right,
probably get a third team involved,
yeah,
but I
and then
think that's
from
the most likely thing.
Yeah, and then even from a basketball standpoint, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because I mean, obviously, that would be the most important aspect outside of the personal stuff, right? Where you look at the basketball court, right? He fills a need in terms of he's a guard that can shoot, he can create off the dribble. Obviously they had Gabe Vincent who can do that, but obviously Lillard is much better.
Yeah,
You can still run a lot of the same types of plays and sets. Obviously, Lillard plays with the ball in his hands more, right? But he can still play in the pick and roll with Bam. You can still do dribble handoffs, right? And obviously that just takes pressure off of Butler and Bam, right? Which is what you want, right? Because
right,
then that allows them to kind of, tap in more into, their two-way capabilities, right? So that way they're not quite as gassed. So I think just in general, like from all sides, it makes a lot of sense. It's just with Portland, you need to find a third team because I don't think if I'm Portland, I would be pretty satisfied with
yeah,
Tyler Hero,
and
Duncan Robinson, and just like mediocre picks down the line. I
right.
think you got to find a third team. Maybe it's Brooklyn, maybe it's somebody else.
I'm
Maybe they kind
thinking,
of rope it into a Harden deal, but we'll see.
I'm thinking it's probably between Brooklyn and like what maybe Utah. Because I feel like they do need like a primary Utah. That is, I feel like they do need a primary ball handler, and I feel like they have a lot of assets to offer. I feel like Portland's gonna want some some youth and some picks. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of possibilities for sure. Um, and then also like with Brooklyn, I think I think Dinwiddie's also his contract is expiring, so that they
Yeah,
could give up Dinwiddie and maybe like a first round pick. That may be enough, but I doubt it.
yeah. The
Um,
Nets have a
yeah,
ton of picks because they got the
e-
Suns picks.
exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, like they have a lot, that they can kind of work with. I think
Yeah,
like because they have the Suns picks. I think they might have a couple Philly ones. I'm not
right.
sure. And like you said, they definitely have some expiring contracts as well.
Yeah, I agree. Um, and I feel like that's kind of it that we really have to say about Dame. It's been in the works for years, but now that we're here, there's not much to say until it honestly
Yeah.
happens. I think this is all rumblings and whatnot, and
Right.
news stuff. So I guess we should probably move into free agency,
Yep.
and start this recap. Do you want to kick it off?
Yeah. So
All
obviously,
right, cool.
we had an interesting, start to free agency. Right. This was kind of a scenario where we talked about it. We knew that this free agency class was one of the weaker ones in
Hmm.
recent memory, just because not really any superstars, right? Obviously, some solid upper tier players, right? Like all star caliber guys, and then guys below that, right? Guys that can help out a lot of teams,
Right.
but no real like superstars, right? Um, so I guess if we want, do we want to start with our winners and losers, or do we
Sure,
kind of
we can
just
start with our
go
winners and losers.
yeah. So, for me, basically, I guess my kind of three that I have is I have the Lakers, I have the
Hmm.
Suns, and I have
Hmm.
Indiana.
Okay.
So with the Lakers, obviously, I think they make a lot of sense because they were able to, bring back all their core guys, right? They brought back D'Angelo Russell, they brought back Austin Reeves, brought back Rui Hachimura, and then they were able to kind of add on some extra pieces, of need, that they, kind of that could have helped them a lot last year, right? They surprisingly got Gabe Vincent, out of Miami, right, on 3-year, $33 million deal, right?
Hmm.
Basically to replace Dennis Schroeder,
Sure.
who went to Toronto, got more money in Toronto. I think that's a guy where obviously in the playoffs he played really well, much better in the playoffs than in the regular season. So that's kind of a question as to what version of him you're getting. Um, but at his best, he's a really good offensive player. Can score in the pick and roll. He can shoot well. He's a tough guy at that guard spot, which I think they needed. He defends pretty well. And again, like he's also kind of in a way D'Lo insurance.
Sure.
Right. So say for example, last year when D'Lo had some bad games, right, they would play Shooter down the stretch. But this time you can play Vincent. Who's probably a better fit than Shooter, even though Shooter had a good year for them.
Hmm.
And even if you end up trading D'Lo down the line, right, that's a guy that could potentially, slide into that starting spot. I think Jovan Buha even reported those two guards could battle it out for the starting spot, which I'm curious to see how that works. But um, and then you move over right to like a guy like Torian Prince, right? That was a guy that we didn't even really talk about on
Right.
our free agency list. But he went there, basically for 4 million, right? That gives them 6'7", 6'8" wing that can shoot. They signed Jackson Hayes on day two, right? Obviously, kind of like a gamble as a young athletic center, right? Didn't really pan out for New Orleans, but
Right.
maybe he can turn it around. I'm in LA, right? Kind of the same with Cam Reddish, right? Another young guy. didn't really pan out so far, but maybe he turns it around. Um, so that's kind of where I'm looking at it for them. And then, even when we look at some of the contracts, right? Other than Rui, right? D'Lo and Reeves went for less than I think either of us expected, right?
Yes.
I think you had D'Lo sort of. You thought he would be sort of in the 25-ish million
Yeah,
dollar range.
that's what I was
I,
thinking.
I had him closer to 20.
Yeah.
Um, I think it averaged out to about 18 and a half a year.
It's a
Again, I just
steal.
didn't feel like, yeah, yeah, I think that's a pretty good deal for the Lakers because again, it's 2 years, so it's short term. It's easy to trade, and you're not paying a ton for him. So, again, there's no guarantees there. And then even Austin Reeves, right? Neither of us, because some people thought that at least one team would throw him, a ton of money. I just didn't see it. I didn't think a team was going to give him the 4 years,
Right.
$98 million,
I
and they
think
did not.
everybody knew that he was coming back, even like executives around the league. I feel like they just knew that it
Right.
wasn't worth it.
Yeah, and like then if you give him an offer sheet, then that cap space is tied up for 24 hours and you can't
Right.
really do anything else. So that's definitely a steal for LA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, we thought he would get more than the max the Lakers could offer him, but not the full max that the other teams could offer him. But he didn't. He basically got the max that the Lakers could offer, 4 years, 56. So that's a really good deal. So I think for them, you take a team that went to the Western Conference Finals, and I think you added guys that are better fits.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can kind of see what you do with that center situation, right? Because, just Jackson Hayes to back up AD. There's not really that many other centers in free agency, so we'll see what they do. But regardless, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right. And then you look at Phoenix, right? They added a decent amount of guys, considering they only had minimum contracts to work with. I think the quality of players you got at the minimum is pretty solid, right? They
Yes.
just picked up Eric Gordon today. If you're watching this on Monday, right, we're recording on Sunday. They signed Eric Gordon today.
Mm-hmm.
On day one, they got guys like Drew Eubanks as a backup center, Yuta Watanabe, right, as a backup
Yeah.
forward, brought
These
back
are all
Josh
good
Giddey.
pickups.
Yeah, exactly. Signed Kata Bates Diop. So I think those are pretty solid pickups, right? Because you got, positions of need and players of need. So I think that's really good. Because again, with them, they only had the minimum to work with. So to
Right.
get those type of players, it helps. Obviously, can those guys help you in a playoff series? That has yet to be, determined, right? But obviously, for the regular season, it's better than, you know, what we saw, say, like with the Lakers' big three when they had Russ, right? When it was those three guys, but then a bunch of guys that were, kind of past their primes, right? And Dwight Howard, DeAndre Jordan, Melo, um, guys like that. So for the minimum, those are pretty good value. So I think that helps them a lot, just in terms of adding depth. Because again, not great guys, right? But for the minimum, that's how you look at it, right? Because we mentioned with Eric Gordon, right? When it was kind of rumored that he could have been, a guy that the Lakers split their exception level money on, and I
Right.
wouldn't have been happy with that. But on a minimum
Yeah, you were
contract,
raging, man.
yeah, exactly, right? Because again, not a bad player at all, just not somebody I would use the exception on. But on a minimum contract, right, that's great value, right? Kind of like with Otto Porter Jr. The year that he was on the Warriors, right? Where if he's making 30 million a year, right, that's not really good. But on a minimum contract, that's kind of a steal.
Right.
So I like that. And then with Indiana, right, I liked what they did in free agency, right? Bruce Brown obviously gave him 20 million a year, which is a lot, but it's only 2 years, and the second year is a team option. Right? We didn't even mention these in the live stream, right? But we saw some guys in that 2020 draft class sign extensions, right? So they re-signed Tyrese Halliburton. Makes a lot of sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Franchise cornerstone point guard. Actually traded for Obi Toppin,
Yeah,
which
that was
oh,
interesting.
yeah, which I thought was really
Great
interesting,
move.
right? Yeah, it gives them some more size, gives them some athleticism at that forward spot, right, to add to other guys like Jarvis Walker.
Right.
Um, obviously you
They're
had
getting
Bruce
deep.
Brown. Yeah, exactly. So I love what they did. They traded away Chris Duarte, right? But again, you brought in Bruce Brown, who will probably be better for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked what they did. So those are kind of my winners.
Okay.
I guess, and then I guess you can get into your winners, and then we'll get
Sure.
into the losers.
Yeah. So my biggest winner, well, I'm not gonna say biggest, but I'm not gonna, use any adjectives to describe it outside of winner. Um, but yeah, Lakers was one of mine, and it's basically for the same reasons. I don't really need to reiterate. But my next one was the Bucks. So
Oh
I
yeah,
think the Bucks were a huge winner because they brought back two of their guys that helped them win the championship, and honestly are probably their maybe second, third best players at times, and that's Chris Middleton. They brought back Chris Middleton on a 3-year, 102 million deal, which is good, I think. He brings a lot of value to that team. He got them to the championship alongside Giannis, of course. Um, So yeah, and that was something that we really stressed upon them, in terms of the pressure on the free agency. We needed to see these guys come back. And obviously Lopez came back on a 2-year, $48 million deal, which is a huge thing because he had a lot of buzz surrounding him. I think he had even more buzz than Middleton because it seemed like teams were chasing him, constantly. So, it's good to see him back as well. And, he provides a lot of help for Giannis on the boards and being a defender as well. So that's probably I guess I'll go ahead and call them the biggest winner because they're going to be able to keep that championship squad pretty much um, similar. And then my next winner was more my final winner was the Warriors. I think they won just because they got Draymond back on that four-year $100 million deal. I think that's great. You got to keep your heart and soul happy. You got to keep him around. He clearly knows how to win. He's 4 championships, so and he's been there for every single one of them. So he's one of the premier defenders in the league. I think still even getting up in age, and they don't have a lot of time left on this championship window for this core that they believe so much in. And bringing him back is definitely something that we stressed on them as well. We didn't have them too much in a pressure cooker because we kind of thought that Draymond was coming back anyways. I think the whole world did. But nonetheless, to have him back is still a W in my book. Um, and yeah, I guess to get into the losers, I don't know how many you have, but I guess I'll.
I had three.
Okay, yeah, I have three as well. So the biggest loser, in my opinion, I think was probably Philly. Um, just because James Harden opted out or opted in, excuse me. So that means a trade is coming. So the relationship is gone. It's soured. So now they're left with what? Pretty much just Joel Embiid and then more rumblings about Tobias Harris. So I think that's a big loss for them because now, you lose James Harden and what can you get back for him and where is he going to go? So that's my biggest concern with them. My next loser is obviously Portland. Were not a fan of this pick, or not pick, but this contract. When we saw it, we were like overpay. Our chat was screaming overpay as well. So they overpaid Jeremy Grant, I think, on a 5-year, $160 million deal, and they also are losing Damian Lillard. So they kind of brought him back for honestly no reason on a big deal like that. Because we were kind of hypothesizing that they brought back Grant to keep Lillard happy, but that didn't seem like that was enough. So Lillard's still on his way out, but now you've got to shill out all that money on a young rebuilding roster to Jeremy Grant out of all people. So I think that's a big loss. And then honestly, I'm gonna say the Bulls are another loser in my opinion, just because like I'm not a fan of that Vucevic contract or not even the contract, but just him in general. I think he's declined to the point where he should not be getting paid 3 years, 60 million. And that's not a knock on like, his talent. He's still a pretty good center because he's in the NBA. But for that kind of money and what they need, I think they need to kind of just scrap it, especially with all the Levine rumors as well. And I'm trying to think who else did they sign? They signed Javon Carter, so that is, I guess, it's more of like a lowercase L because I think Carter's pretty good, and that's kind of the similar archetype to Lonzo. Obviously, not nearly on the same tier, but similar archetype, defensive guard that can make plays. So, they did get him, but bringing back Vucevic is not a good look in my opinion. So, what were your losers for this?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I literally had the same exact
Okay.
teams.
Okay.
The funny thing was, I was actually initially gonna have the Warriors on there because I didn't feel like that they upgraded in free agency the way that they
Okay.
needed to. Now, I
That's
feel like
fair.
some of that is gonna be I don't have them on the list right now because some of it was TBD, just based off of like, maybe they get like a Dario Saric or a Christian Wood,
Right.
and then you'll feel better about it. But then like when I looked at the Bulls, I did swap the Warriors and the Bulls because I'm like,
It's
yeah, that
bad.
was awful. Yeah, I didn't like any of their signings, to be honest. The Vucevic one, I understand you can't just let him walk. Maybe you can trade him down the line. But it also was just kind of a reminder that, the Vucevic trade just ended up not working out, right? You look at Orlando, they ended up basically with Wendell Carter Jr., Franz
Yep.
Wagner, and I guess Jet Howard, which doesn't make it quite as bad, but still Wendell Carter Jr. and Franz Wagner. I think you'd rather have that if you're the Bulls than Vucevic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my opinion. Like you mentioned, Javon Carter, he's fine, right? I mean, is he worth that contract? Maybe. I mean, it's not bad. And then after that, I guess they re-signed Kobe White. I'm assuming they'll bring back Ayo DeSunmu,
Right.
right? So I feel like there's a few too many guards. And just,
Yeah.
but again, like some of it is also just you're kind of just in a rough spot with the Lonzo situation. because again, today they applied for the disabled player exception,
Right, I
right? So
forgot about
that
that.
would obviously suggest he's going to be out for the whole year,
And I
which
think it's like
we
12
kind of knew
million, right?
anyway. Yeah, it's about 10, 12 million. So that'll give them, more money to sign somebody, which will be
Right.
interesting because whoever that is, right, is going to get more money than pretty much any other team I think has left at this
Mm-hmm.
point, aside from, I guess, some of the other cap space teams like the Spurs. Um, yeah, so I mean, I guess the Bulls, yeah, I swapped them with the Warriors because I think the Bulls had a worse offseason just
Yeah.
because we know they're going to be not very good.
Yeah, the Warriors
Um,
still have a chance to be okay or good,
yeah, exactly.
Bulls have
Yeah,
no shot.
exactly. Yeah, like you said, Philly, similar reasons. Even without the Harden trade, they didn't really add anybody.
Right.
I guess they added Patrick Beverly, so I guess that's, better than
Woohoo.
nothing. But you also lost Jalen McDaniels, who wasn't great for them, right? But also considering that he wasn't being paid a ton of money, why not just bring him back,
Right.
just as an extra player? Because so again, they didn't add anybody. Um, you know, Portland, the only reason why I didn't have them as a loser was, mainly just more so because I feel like whenever they trade Dame, like,
They're gonna get
you
something
got
back.
yeah, they're gonna like get something, like at least in terms of picks. Now that's different from free agency. Um, obviously, because again, the Jeremy Grant contract, very bad. Not,
Horrendous.
necessarily, but like more
Right.
so just like again,
The
we thought it
money.
was gonna be like years, but 5 years is a lot. Shout out Rich Paul, for getting him that
Yeah.
contract, obviously.
And like we
Um,
don't have a problem, with him returning. We think he's a good player, but for that contract and that amount of money on a rebuilding team, I don't think that's a smart move. I don't think that was a good move in general.
Um, but then, I also looked at Houston, and I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit let down,
Yeah.
by what they did. And it wasn't necessarily like the players that they signed,
Mhm.
for the most part, because we predicted, that both Dylan Brooks and Fred Van Vliet were gonna go
Yeah.
there. But I don't really care for the contracts so much that they got. Fred Van Vliet, 3 years, 130. I mean, that's, fine. I thought it was gonna be 2 years, but 3 years I guess isn't too much worse, I
Right.
suppose.
Sure.
Dylan Brooks got 4 years, which I think is just too long.
Dylan
In
Crooks,
my,
man. He
I
freaking
mean,
robbed them.
the way that I look at it is again, like it's unlike a lot of these other contracts. I believe his contract descends per year, right? So, it's not like a scenario where it's backloaded; it's front loaded, so it
Okay.
goes down over time. I think he
Okay.
starts at 21 and goes down to like 17, so that's not too bad. I just think 4 years is too long, in my opinion, and I don't know. Like I understand signing him, I don't like the length of the contract. That's my issue. Jock Landale, that was kind of random.
Yeah.
4 years, 32 million. It's interesting in that only the first year is non-guaranteed, and that kind of speaks volumes to, I've mentioned it in the past where sometimes we just kind of have to wait for more information to come out just
Right.
because like sometimes when these contracts first come out, it sounds horrible, right? Like it sounds horrible, if you're Houston and you gave Jock Landale a 4 year, 30 plus million dollar contract, but then it's like only 1 year is non-guaranteed. Um, but I don't know. I just feel like I didn't really care for most of what they did. Like I said, the Van Vliet one is fine. I just don't like the length of the Dylan Brooks contract.
Sure.
You could also argue maybe the Spurs sort of as a semi-loser in free agency. I mean, they're
Yeah.
supposed to be bad anyways, but considering that they had a lot of cap space, and they
Yeah.
were kind of rumored to be a destination, not for stars obviously, but like for somebody, anybody,
For
and they
like
didn't really
Van
get
Vliet.
anyone. Yeah, like yeah, I just
Because what? They only
maybe
brought
you could
back
argue.
like Trey Jones, right?
Yeah, it was basically bringing back a few players, right? And I guess like they probably caught wind that they weren't getting anybody.
Right.
I feel like that's kind of disappointing if you're the Spurs because again, you had a lot of cap space and you just didn't really use it on anything. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of back and forth between the Spurs and the Rockets, but because the Rockets like don't have a pick, right? Like they're in a different scenario than the Spurs, where like it's okay if the Spurs didn't get anybody,
Sure.
because they're supposed to be bad,
Yeah.
right? Whereas with the Rockets, I just think it's a really strange team. They also made a couple trades, right, where they were sending some guys out, right? Like I think the Dylan Brooks signing, I think, is a sign and trade, right? So there's some other things that have to be worked out. Like I think
Right.
they're gonna send Josh Christopher from Houston over to Memphis, so I like that for Memphis, just as another young guy to pick up.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know. Like I'm just kind of torn between some of these teams, but
I
definitely
get it.
Bulls and Sixers absolutely I think, are for sure losers. Like I said, Warriors is a little bit TBD, but again, there's not very many guys left.
Right.
So that's kind of the issue. I mean, again, if you get like a Dario Saric, yeah, that's an upgrade. But is it enough? But at
I
the
think they
same
just
time,
believe in that core three way too much.
yeah, yeah. But in fairness, I think at the same time, there's also teams that did worse than them, for sure in
Absolutely.
free. Another team that I actually forgot, I didn't have them quite as much of a winner as the other teams, but just sort of like as an honorable mention, I had Cleveland because I actually kind of liked
Me too.
some of the moves that they made. Not enough to like put them as like an absolute winner, but I liked most of what they did. They brought back Karis LeVert, but they actually got some good shooters, right? They got Georges Niang, they got Max Strus in a sign and trade, and I think again you didn't have to give up anything really, for those guys. I guess they
Mm-mm.
swapped Max Strus for with and Jetty Osman.
Right.
I think he went to the Spurs if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So I guess like you know, that's fine. Like, because again, with Cleveland, a big problem in the playoffs was they could not hit a jump shot,
Hmm.
outside of a couple of guys, and now you have a couple of guys that are decent jump shooters, right?
Right.
Struess obviously was up and down in the playoffs, but he is a guy that you have to pay attention to as a jump shooter, right? He's got a good release, right? You can't just leave him open. You have to pay attention to him.
Sure.
And Cleveland didn't have a lot of those guys last year. They had a
Yeah.
number of guys, that you could kind of just back off and just kind of dare them to shoot. And that's not great when you have, two bigs in your lineup that are not really floor spacers either, and Mobley and Jarrett Allen. So that definitely helps.
Yeah.
But I had them more as a sort of like an honorable mention winner,
I
just
get
because
you.
I think the other teams did more to put themselves in that winner category,
Yeah.
than Cleveland.
I agree. And I guess, now that we talked about our winners and losers, we should probably get into teams that weren't, in the winner or loser category. Um,
Yeah, just meh.
yeah. You said what now?
Yeah, just kind of just meh.
Yeah, like just they signed
Right.
people. Like, they didn't really take a W or
They
L.
sure did. Yeah.
And I guess to start, this is a little bit of Wizards bias, but I'm gonna do the Wizards. Yeah, we signed Kuzma, so he's back on a 4-year, $102 million deal. Um, During the live stream, I liked it, but the more and more I'm kind of thinking about it, I'm a little bit torn because I don't know, how far Kuzma is gonna take us. Obviously, we're in a rebuild, so I don't expect too much. But even in the long run, like, 2 years from now, are we going to be looking at this contract like, was this an overpay? Or are we going to be looking at it like, good job, you need another extension or something like that? Like, what were your thoughts on it? Because I'm torn about it. But at the same time, when I did hear about it initially, I did like it and it was a surprise because I'd heard rumblings that, he was out of there because of the asking price. But, now that he's back, it is what it is for me.
I guess the way that I look at it is it's better than him just walking.
Sure.
Now, where would he have necessarily gone, right? Because it seemed like, it was pretty clear that the market wasn't really there for a number of guys, right? Like we saw some guys, that had player options not even enter free agency.
Hmm.
Like say like Jordan Clarkson, right? He ended up just signing an extension, 3 years, 55 million. And again, Kuzma's different because he's a forward as opposed to a guard, right? But regardless, I mean, the way that I look at it is the cap is going to go up every year. So the contracts that we think are a lot now, just wait a couple years down the road, and you'll see,
Right.
that they're going to get even crazier.
We're
I
about to
mean,
see it with Jalen
keep in
Brown.
mind, yeah. Now keep in mind with the max contracts, it's not specifically the dollar amount; it's more so the percentage of the cap that they
Right.
take up. Because again, it's based off of I guess the max they can get, based off
Yes.
of a lot of variables. But either way, I mean, Kuzma he'll be making what, like 30-ish, or 25
It's
to
like
30
around
million.
it's like in between that high 20s range.
Yeah, exactly. So that's basically what he was looking for.
Mhm.
And again, that's a lot of money, but at the same time with the Wizards, like you're kind of in a position where you got to spend it on somebody. You
Yeah.
didn't really have cap space anyways, right? Because Poole's making a lot of money, and you have a few other in between contracts, right? They got rid of Monte Morris. They kind of just salary dumped them to Detroit,
Good deal.
which was kind of also a theme that we saw, where we saw like a lot of those teams with cap space, like Detroit, San Antonio, not really make like real signings. They just kind of took
True.
on contracts, right? Which I guess I kind of forgot to mention with the
Right.
Spurs, right? Brought in like Jetty Osman, for Detroit. They brought in Joe Harris from Brooklyn.
Right.
They brought in Monte Morris, which again, that's a fine route because again, you're not really giving up a lot and you're bringing in
Exactly.
somebody, that can do something, right? With Detroit, you got a guy that's, a veteran that can shoot. Two actually in Monte Morris and, Joe Harris.
Yeah.
But with the Wizards, I mean, again, I think it just kind of factors down to you're paying Jordan Poole a lot of money as well. So
Yes.
both guys are going to be making a lot of money, but in theory, those are also your two best players. But at the same time, right, like, next year, the Wizards aren't. I would imagine not. They're not going to be projected to be a good team. So
Absolutely
it's
not.
like right.
I'm
So
just
it's
thinking
like
about it from a future point of view. Like, is
yeah,
Kuzma
from a
somebody we
future
want to build around potentially,
right.
or
Yeah, I
keep
guess
around?
the thing is that, there's it's not an untradeable contract, I don't
Absolutely
think,
not.
Like, it's a lot of money, but at the same time, as you get, like, 2 years in, right, maybe it'll get to a point where it's like, oh, maybe he wants out or, oh, maybe another team's interested because somebody will be interested in him, as his contract gets closer to being to being over because he's a solid player. Um But, that's kinda how you have to look at it. Look at it from 2 perspectives of, you keep a guy that you have, it doesn't really hurt you, by re-signing him because again, like, you don't have a ton of huge contracts anyways.
Hmm.
And it's somebody that can actually play, right, as opposed to, like, just a horrible team with basically nobody on it.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I'm
that's
still
kinda how
torn
you
on it
have to look
though.
yeah. Like, is it more than what you might have been expecting? Perhaps, but it
Yeah,
was kind of rumored that he was gonna get a big contract, a big raise anyways, because he was making, what, 13,
13,
15 million
13.
before. Yeah, exactly, so he was gonna make more than that,
Yeah,
right? Like, he wasn't gonna
he
go
deserves
from
it.
13 yeah, he wasn't gonna go from 13 million to 14 million.
Right.
So, I mean, again, like, is it Jeremy Grant's 5-year,
Absolutely
$160 million
not.
contract?
No.
Yeah, exactly, no, because again, Kuzma's still you know, at a point where he's not going to get better, right? But he'll still provide some value.
Exactly.
And again, 4 years, so he's not going to get worse, I don't think, assuming he's healthy. So I think it's fine. Because
Right.
again, you're not giving anyone else big money. So it's not really that big of a deal, right? It's not like because you gave him that contract, you're way into the tax, and all of a sudden, you're in that punitive spot where you're losing picks. Like it's fine. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Um.
So
Yeah. Did you wanna move us on, or do you want me to do it?
yeah, I mean, just in general, like I said, I feel like most of the Mad teams were the teams that had cap space, that kind of just brought in guys via trade. We mentioned Detroit.
Hmm.
We mentioned San Antonio. They didn't really do a whole lot. Um,
I'm curious to
the
hear your
Miami
thoughts about Dallas too.
yeah, Miami Heat kind of TBD, right? Because that's kind of based off of whether or not they get Lillard.
Right.
I think right because if they don't get Lillard, then obviously you'd almost kind of have to move them into the loser category. But if they get Lillard, right, then that's a different story. Um, Dallas is kind of interesting, like you mentioned, right? Because obviously they re-signed Kyrie, they had to. There was, no world where if they lose Kyrie, they're better off,
Right.
because you can't replace him. So you got him right on a contract that's fine, right? He's making over 40 million a year,
Hmm.
but it's just for 3 years. Third year's a player option, so you're not wed to him forever. So that's I think fine. I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, didn't really do much else on the margins. I guess they brought in Seth Curry,
Yeah. They brought
who
in
played
Seth
really
Curry.
well. Yeah, who played really well for Dallas. So obviously he's the guy that can shoot. So that ideally would make, one of these guys movable because they have a ton of guards now. I mean, they have
Yeah.
Seth Curry, Hardaway, Kyrie, Luca. I think what is his name? Hardy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, him. I
Yeah.
mean,
I
they have a
forgot about
ton
him.
of guards on that roster, so I feel like one of those guys
And
has to move.
their another one of their signings was Dante Exum as well.
Yeah, Dante Exum, I
Yeah, that he
forgot,
made a
former
return to the NBA.
yeah, former lottery pick, former 2K15 star.
Yep.
So I mean, yeah, so their free agency was kind of blah. I mean, not bad, but like not really anything great. I mean, again, Seth Curry, that's a good signing. Dante Exum, we'll see, because again, he's been out of the league for a while, for a reason.
Yeah.
And then they brought back like Powell, who I
Yeah.
guess is a fine option at center. But now again, you have a ton of bigs and you have a ton of guards.
Yeah.
You still need to figure out what you're going to do with that wing position, right?
Right.
Because
I
that's
would have
kind of
liked to
what
have
they're
seen them
missing.
go after, like, I don't know,
Yeah, like
something like
yeah,
Cam
like could
Reddish.
they
I
have
don't
gotten
know.
Torian Prince, as opposed
Or
to,
yeah.
Seth Curry? Because I think they're on the same type of contract. So I
Yeah.
mean, that's probably somebody that could have helped them. Not that Seth Curry won't help them. It's just, Torian Prince gives you more size,
Sure.
a little bit versatility. I mean, maybe he just preferred to go to LA, but which always is a factor. But yeah, I don't feel like they really did a whole lot. So I feel like you kind of have to have them in the man. I like kind of what they did in the draft, but in terms of free agency, not much. But again, they didn't have cap space, so there
You're right.
wasn't really a whole lot they could do. Denver was kind of interesting, right? Because they didn't really add anyone. I think today they just added Justin Holiday, who hasn't, in my opinion, really done a whole lot of
No.
significant things the last few seasons.
No.
They lost Bruce Brown, obviously. They also lost Jeff Green, who went to Houston, for on a 1 year, $6 million deal, right? Obviously, getting more money than you probably get from Denver.
And he's a vet. He
So I
can
think
help those guys down there.
Right, exactly. Losing Bruce Brown, I think, is relatively significant. Obviously, he's not a star; he's a role player, so it's not the same as losing one of your main guys. But he was a guy that was a big part of their roster
Sure.
and their identity. So maybe they're just banking on internal improvement from some of the young guys like Christian Brown. Maybe one of the rookies they draft kind of pops. And either way, like they're gonna win a lot of games in the regular
Yeah.
season, regardless. Um, so I do kind of wonder how they fare, but they brought back Reggie Jackson, brought back DeAndre Jordan, interestingly enough. So they didn't really do a whole lot. Um, the Clippers, right? That was kind of an intriguing team, right? Because they're a little TBD, because we don't know what's going on with the Harden situation, right? If they get him, that's another story. I like the KJ Martin trade where you basically got him for nothing.
Right.
Um, they brought back Russell Westbrook.
The big
That was
guy.
kind of another thing, and we can kind of get into, sort of our, predictions, in terms of how right they were, because most of them were relatively spot on.
Mhm.
Westbrook, we weren't really sure where he was going to go because I thought he would get more money,
Yeah.
than what he got. He basically got, like a bump, like a little bit like 4 million a year.
Yeah.
So I didn't initially think he was going back just because I thought he'd get more money. But once the money dried up, makes a lot of sense. Right, but after that, they didn't really sign anyone else,
Yeah.
to my knowledge. I mean, obviously, you're still kind of waiting what's going on with Plumlee, because he's a free agent. Obviously, they got rid of Eric Gordon. Um, but either way, they're kind of TBD, right? Because again, if
Yeah.
you get Harden, depending on what you give up for Harden, right? I think that's might be a win. Again,
Yeah.
depending on what you give up.
And shout out to
But for
Xander
now,
because, like, the guy in our chat, because he was a Clipper fan,
right?
and he was saying, he would prefer to have Russ over Harden, which is an
Yeah,
interesting
which is
take.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, we thought
Yeah,
that was really interesting. But,
but I think
now they have Russ back. And I think, he did show that he's got, some game left, especially in the
yeah,
playoffs and towards the
and he
end.
played
I
well
thought he
with the
was really
Clippers, so
well. I thought it was a really good
yeah, exactly.
signing, good pickup or
Right,
return.
exactly. Honestly, yeah, honestly, it worked out better than we, thought it was going to
Yeah,
work
we
out.
thought it was going to be
Um,
horrid.
yeah, so I mean, so that's good for him, in a way, right? Because again, like some people thought he would just be out of the league, which I never thought. I thought he, would,
Yeah, that was a little
obviously he can
extreme.
still play. Yeah, he can play at a level where he's gonna be in
Right.
the NBA.
He's going to be in the
Um,
NBA for a while. I think, we'll slowly see him start to, go down the line on the bench, kind of similar to Rose, I guess, but, nothing, you're not out of the league. No way.
yeah, yeah, not yet. Um, yeah, so in terms of a lot of these teams, again, because free agency went by relatively quickly, right? Because again, most of the signees, right? Like it's pretty much done at this point. Obviously, there's still a handful of guys, that are still out there, right? But not really a ton of like great options, right? Malik Beasley's still out there, former Laker.
Yeah.
Christian Wood is out there, right? Because Dallas didn't bring him back. Kelly Oubre,
Yep.
he's out there.
Grant
Mason
Williams.
Plumlee. Yeah, Grant Williams, who is a restricted free agent, right? He might go to Charlotte, or somewhere else. I don't
Hmm.
think he'll be back in Boston, which was a prediction we had.
Yeah.
We
Paul
didn't
Reed,
expect him
maybe.
back. Yeah, Paul Reed, I think he's restricted as well.
Okay.
So there's not really a lot of great options out there at this point. So, it's kind of interesting how
Slim Pickens,
fast
man.
free agency went.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the other aspect as well. Like you said, that it's kind of slim pickings at this point for teams that didn't really get anybody, just yet. Because again, like I mean, if you look, especially at that center spot, right? There's just not a ton of great options. I mean, outside of Plumlee, right? After that, right? Then it goes to like Bismack Biyombo,
Christian Wood.
Robin Lopez, Christian Wood, Mo Bamba. So just from that center spot, it's one of the
Mediocre.
worst. Yeah, it's pretty rough, out there. But
Yeah, everybody got picked up pretty quickly, though.
yeah, so and again, you're like we can kind of go over some of our expectations, right? We both thought Middleton and Brooke Lopez would re-sign, like you
Yep.
said, that was huge for Milwaukee.
Yes.
Some people thought Brooke Lopez would leave. I just didn't think that some of these guys. I didn't really think that were good. I didn't think they were gonna get like big offers from
Right.
some of these other teams. I mean, maybe they did, but I'm assuming with Brooke Lopez, either it was close or the offers just weren't there, right? Because we didn't really hear like, hey, the Spurs are thinking about offering player X, certain amount of money a year, right?
Right.
Because some people thought that could be like an Austin Reeves team, or maybe Houston was a Reeves team, or even
Right.
like Rui Hachimura, right? But a number of those guys got picked up relatively quickly, right? DiVincenzo, that was a guy that I thought was going to the
Hmm.
Knicks. I think that's a good pickup for them, to complete that Villanova triumvirate.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, with him, Brunson, and Josh Hart.
Yep.
So I mean, I like that. Like you mentioned, Draymond, we both thought would go back to Golden State, right? That's perfectly fine. Kyrie back to Dallas. Van Vliet going to Toronto, a lot of money for 3 years, right? But again, they had to spend it
Huge
on somebody.
contract.
Grant, obviously, 5 years, 160, kind of a L. For Portland,
Boo.
especially considering that they're probably going to trade Damian Lillard, so I feel like that
Right.
makes it even worse.
Exactly.
Um,
That was my point. You don't want to rebuild around that.
Right, so that's kind of tough. D'Lo, we both thought he would go back to the Lakers just, you know, I thought he would get less than what others were saying, but I
Hmm.
didn't expect him to get 18 million. Wood, we didn't know. We mentioned Orlando, but Orlando didn't get him. I think they signed Joe Ingles,
Hmm.
to a
2 year
decent
for
sized
22.
contract. Yeah, 2 years, 22, and I think they signed today Mo Wagner, I think, for a 2-year deal.
Yep.
Um, so no Christian Wood there, it seems like. Kuzma, we kind of initially thought before we recorded that he was going to go to the Kings.
Yeah.
But then as we were getting ready to record, right, the Barnes extension came up. So then we were like, yeah, he's probably going back to the
Yeah.
Wizards. Um, Dylan Brooks, we both thought would go to Houston, right? He went there, 4 years, 80 million. Obviously, that. That's kind of interesting, right? Where you look at some of the contracts, right? Say like, Austin Reeves, right, per year, he's going to be making less than Dylan Brooks, which I think is kind of interesting.
Dylan Brooks.
Um, and again, not at all a bad player, right? Obviously, defensively,
Right.
one of the best in the league, right? Just offensively, kind of up and down. I'm curious to see what Ime Udoka can tap out of him because I don't feel like he was always like this, where he was kind of just, acting, kind
No.
of out of pocket at times. I feel like, when he
Never.
was first, yeah, he was just kind of just like a regular 3-and-D type of guy.
Literally.
Uh, yeah, but,
Inconsistent three,
again,
but he has good defense. That's been
right.
the memo of his game. But now he's become a trash talker.
Yeah, Bruce Brown, we both thought would go to Indiana.
Hmm.
Not for as much money as we thought, right? But we certainly thought he was going there.
Hmm.
I think we were split on DiVincenzo. I think you thought, it might be Minnesota. They picked up, I think, Shake Milton,
Yeah,
and Troy
and Troy
Brown
Brown.
Jr.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Miles Bridges, right? That was intriguing. We thought that he would probably go back to Charlotte. He ended up today picking up the qualifying offer, right? So he's going to be an unrestricted free agent the next year. So he's going to have to, I guess he's pretty much kind of like on a 1-year prove it type of deal. Reportedly, they're kind of far apart in talks. Makes sense given his, given
Right.
his recent stuff. So he's like I said, he's basically on a 1-year prove it. But obviously, if you're Charlotte, just from a talent perspective, that helps, right? Because I think they definitely missed him, in terms of his production on the
And he
court
would
at
have been a
least.
max contract player. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, exactly. Because he
It's
he
crazy.
was because I think the GM Mitch Kupchak the day of or the day before the news came out about him was saying like, yeah, we're gonna give him that big deal and he's gonna be back and be part of our future.
It's
And that
crazy, man.
hurt Charlotte a lot. In addition to others that it hurt because when you look at it from that perspective, right, like they were lacking that talent, at that forward spot. Obviously, now you throw in Brandon Miller. They just gave Lamelo Ball right that big contract
Big one.
extension. And they added Mark Williams, so they have some more interesting players now. So they should be better. I don't know if they're going to be a good team, but it was interesting because a few years ago they were at least a play-in team, so it felt like there was progress that they were getting better, and then it all just kind of came crashing down. So maybe there's a little bit of forward momentum there. We'll see new ownership as well. Um, but regardless, PJ Washington I think is still a restricted free agent. He hasn't been signed yet, so we'll see what happens there.
Hmm.
Struess, right? We didn't know where he was going to go, right? Because there were rumors that he would go to Indiana, but we thought Bruce Brown would go to Indiana. I think what we thought was one of Vincent or Struess would stay. I
Yeah,
think we thought Vincent would stay and that Struess would be gone,
that's
and they ended
exactly
up
the
both
thought
going.
process. Yeah, which is
Yeah, and,
crazy.
and they ended
Now
up
they've
both.
lost them both.
Yeah,
Which
now they
which
lost them
tells
both.
me which tells me Lillard's going there one way or another.
Yeah, yeah, they lost both of those guys. Gabe Vincent went to L.A. As we mentioned earlier, and Max Strus went to Cleveland. Love they brought back. So that's kind of that's good for the
It's
continuity.
good.
Lonnie Walker today. Because we're just going through some of the guys on our list, not
Yeah,
all like big names, right? But he went to Brooklyn. I think it's on a minimum contract.
yeah,
Which kind of sucks considering he played pretty well for the Lakers. But regardless, it's better than nothing. For sure. Because I didn't think the Lakers were going to bring him back.
yeah. We left
Um,
one guy off of
Further,
the
right?
Bulls. Sorry, I just want to interject real quick. We left one
Yeah.
guy off the Bulls, and it was Drummond. Um, he's
Oh yeah, he
back on
picked
a
up his
one
player
year.
option.
Yeah, so he's back on 1 year, 3.4 million. We weren't too keen on that signing, especially also with Vucevic. So
Yeah.
No forward
He
progress,
already
but
had
sorry.
that contract.
Yeah. Continue
Yeah.
with the Schroeder.
I mean, he already had that contract anyways
Yeah.
because that was from a year ago. It was a
Yeah.
2-year deal, but the second year was a player option. It was just kind of odd because it was rumored that they said he was going to go to Dallas, but I'm
Right.
like, how is that possible? He has a player option, and then that fell through.
Yeah.
And they brought back Dwight Powell, so interesting there. But yeah, with Schroeder, yeah, he got. We thought, I think we both thought he would probably go back to LA.
That's what I was
Um,
thinking.
Only because again, we didn't expect the Gabe Vincent thing
Right.
to happen at all. But he ended up getting more money than the Lakers could offer him, so that makes a lot of sense. 2 years, 26 million, 13 million a year, and he's going to be the Raptors' starting point guard because he'll
Yeah.
replace Van Vliet. So obviously, good story for him, right? He's a guy that lost out, on an opportunity on a big contract, right? And then had a couple of small contracts the last couple of seasons, and then
Right.
played himself to a bigger deal. So that's a good story. So that's pretty good. From my perspective.
I
So
agree.
there's, like I said, there's still a few names out there. As we mentioned, Malik Beasley, Christian Wood, Kelly Oubre, Dario Saric. There's a lot of talk about Saric probably going to Golden State. I think he'll probably help them just, because again, as a stretch five option, because they didn't really have that last year, right? Because JaMychal Green didn't really work out. Um, but either way, it's going to be interesting, right? Because he's not really much of a defender, but he is a high IQ player. So he could probably be sort of like what Bielicha was the year they
Hmm.
won the title. But again, it's not official yet. Christian Wood, I wonder where he goes.
Me too.
Because again, he's a guy that played for Dallas last year, and started off playing pretty well for them, and then just kind of fell out of favor, right? Because again, despite his size, right, not really much of a defender, right, doesn't really rebound great. Um, and again, he's a good offensive player, but clearly the fact that Dallas is okay with letting him go,
It speaks
that's not
volumes.
a great sign for him. Yeah, that speaks volumes, I think. And also again, Houston let him go in terms of trading him for basically nothing.
Yeah.
Um, so there must be something going on there. I feel like he will get signed,
He
but I
will.
almost kind of wonder if it's going to be one of those surprise, like, signings where it's like he's on a really small contract
That's
and
what
it's
I'm
kind of like,
thinking.
yeah. But I guess the question is where, because again, there's not a ton of options left. I don't feel like he's a Golden State guy. I think it's more likely that Sarge is there.
That's what I was
So
gonna
how
say.
many?
Yeah.
Right, so exactly. So how many options are left, or because I don't feel like a team is gonna overpay for him at this point. I feel like he's probably gonna have to take like a really small, prove it deal.
It's
But I
gonna
guess the
be like
question,
1 to 2 years low.
yeah, I think it's one.
Yeah.
Because I feel like he's probably gonna be advised to do a 1-year deal if it's small and be on his best behavior and play well, so he can kind of cash out
Yeah.
next off season. But
Send
I
him to
guess,
the
like I
timeout
said,
corner.
yeah, I guess the question is where though,
I don't know. I mean, like, honestly, it
because
could
we
be
thought
anywhere if it's
Orlando.
small. I thought it was
Yeah,
gonna be Orlando. I really did.
yeah,
Um,
but
yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of just it'll happen when it happens, but I feel like he
yeah.
does have options. It's just I don't know if those options are mutually interested.
Right. Then you have, Malik Beasley. Obviously, the Lakers let him go. There's still an opportunity for them to re-sign him because they have his bird rights.
Right.
But my guess is they probably don't. They have 2 roster spots left, so I think they're going to use one of them on another big,
Big, yep.
and the other one, I think they're just going to save and kind of like save that for later in the season,
Me
like the
too,
buyout
yeah.
market. Yeah, because Rob Pelinka likes to do that. So I mean, but I think it was reported that he has interest from other teams because again, he can shoot. And space the floor. I think I saw like Sixers, Warriors. I think Bucks might have been a name that was
Oh, I would
mentioned
like
if
the
I'm not.
Bucks.
Yeah, so, obviously wherever he goes, he won't be making as much as he made for LA because he basically made I think like 15 million last year. So he
Right.
won't make that much, but he still brings value as a shooter, but I'm sure he'll get picked up. I just again, like, these other remaining guys, I'm not sure where. But Chicago is definitely an interesting place cuz again, they can offer somebody 10 million. And so I feel like there's going to be somebody that gets that.
Yeah.
Could it be Kelly Oubre? Could it
I
be
That wouldn't surprise me.
yeah, because I mean, I feel like of the people available, he's, I guess, probably the best outside of maybe Christian Wood, I guess. But
Right.
they don't need another big man, so I mean, they're already, they're already paying Vucevic and Drummond. So I don't feel like Christian Wood makes sense there. So maybe that's where Oubre goes. And then
Yeah.
after that, I don't really know because again, there's not that many terrific options left. There's going to be some guys that I think are just kind of be kind of left out and maybe they'll
Yeah.
have to kind of hope that somebody gets hurt in training camp and then they end up getting signed late.
And that's the story, with free agency every year, to be honest. There are some guys that don't get signed, within the first days, within the first weeks.
Right.
Some people don't get signed until, mid-season. So,
Yeah.
it's all up to what these executives want to do and the agents and, the
Right.
inner workings.
Because we thought that Westbrook wasn't going to be a day one signing,
Right.
um, but we also didn't expect him to be a guy where he just doesn't get signed for like half the season.
Too
You know what I mean?
talented.
Like, 'cause-
He's way
yeah,
too
because I heard
talented.
other people say that. Yeah, because I heard others say that, but I didn't agree.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I mean, because again, we pretty much went through a lot of them. I guess are there any other signings or any other weird or
Hmm.
funny contracts that are on your mind?
Um, you know, I think the Beverly one is kind of funny just because like
Yeah, but it's
he,
a minimum contract though.
yeah, and it's not like I guess it's not really the contract. I think it's more so, where he's going. It's just funny that he, has become like, a circulator where it's like he's kind of going any and everywhere. So that one's kind of funny to me. I was like 76ers, that's kind of interesting. I don't think he's going to mesh well there at all. He probably won't get a lot of playing time either. Um and I think I'll say like I feel like the funniest one is probably the Villanova trio. I don't know why that it's just funny that they're able to reunite after all these years and then now they've got all three of them, which is pretty cool. And I think they're all guards, so that's really cool. Um and definitely they're
Right.
all worth it too, and they're all good. So
Yeah.
no issues from me at all. Obviously not a huge fan of the Jeremy Grant contract. I think that's the stinker of the bunch. I think that's the rotten egg if you will, but outside of that, I mean, nothing really crazy. Our chat was kind of saying like it was underwhelming free agency and stuff like that. And yeah, it is just because the big names aren't going to be there. And I know you were saying like a lot of these guys are just going to, like, in terms of stars, they're just going to sign these fat extensions and then request a trade when they want to go somewhere. And I feel like that's kind of the meta shift that we're seeing, because you were saying that free agency is probably going to be turning into more of one of those things where it's like, okay, it's that like B tier star and below kind of market versus, your Kevin Durant's, your LeBron's, things like that. So it's all cool, but I thoroughly enjoyed, covering this and watching all the numbers and stuff come in. I think it's really interesting, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more stinkers. Honestly, I think that would have made it a little bit more entertaining, if you will.
Yeah, I think we're almost kind of at a point where I feel like the GMs overall are better, in terms of not just giving out like, these horrible contracts, because
Right.
I remember a few years ago, right, when we were seeing, when that first year when the cap spiked up and we saw, like all these guys, getting, crazy deals like we saw, like Evan Turner, Chandler Parsons,
Oh man, what an
um,
era.
yeah, we saw them getting like, and again, no shot at these players, right? Or Otto Porter Jr., right? Alan Crabb,
Yeah.
right? Like all these guys were getting, way above, way above market values, for who they were as players. Um, but we didn't really see too much of that this year. And like I said, I think some of that kind of also just speaks volumes, just about just in terms of the GMs and the front offices just being better about, not throwing, money
Right.
away. Because even again, even with the Houston contracts, like it's a lot of money, but there's no like damaging, contracts in there, right? Like there was nobody that got like a 4 year, super max contract, not super max, but like a 4 year insane contract that goes up every year, right? I mean, Dylan Brooks, it's all guaranteed, but again, it descends on a year per year
Right.
basis, right? And even with Jock Landale, right? Like only 1 year is guaranteed. So it's not as bad, like I said, as we've seen in the past.
That was
Because
a
we saw
funny
some,
signing too. I'll say that
yeah,
one was
exactly.
kind of weird. I was like,
Yeah, I
okay.
think that yeah, that was definitely one of the funniest ones because I remember we were getting ready to begin the stream, right? And it was reported that he was opting out or not opting out, they took away the qualifying offer.
Right, right,
So he was a restricted free agent and we're like, "Oh wow, he was their backup center."
right.
So you would think they'd bring him back and then
And at
it's like,
times he
"Nope, he
played better than Aiton. At times.
yeah, and it's like yeah, exactly. And it's like, "Nope, the reason why he's an unrestricted free agent is because he got way more money elsewhere." Um
Exactly. We were like, all right.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of how I look at it. Now we're at a point now where we're just kind of waiting, I think, for some of these trades.
Yeah.
Because obviously, like, I think what some of these teams and players are going to be doing is going to be based off of it, right? Like, let's say Miami gets Lillard. Well, then all of a sudden that makes Miami a little bit more attractive, I think, for some of these free agents. And again, they got some, right? They got Thomas Bryant. who's a fine backup center,
Right.
for the regular season at least. They got Kevin Love, and they got Josh Richardson, I think, sort of as a, guard replacement for some of the other
Yes.
guys, which is fine, right? But there's a chance, right? Like, let's say, again, they get Lillard, they'll still need some extra players, right? Because they'll be sending some out. So there's a chance, maybe like a Christian Wood, or like a Malik Beasley or somebody like that is like,
Hmm.
well, let me come here because I'll get to play in Miami, and have a role, get some minutes for a chance to contend.
Yeah.
Um, and then like even the Knicks, I think, they were reported, as a team initially going into free agency that's star hunting. Then there was a report that came out the other day that said, nope, they're not star hunting. Um, but I think the Harden and Lillard ones are definitely something to watch because again, I do think with Philly, there's the potential if they don't get a good trade return back for
Hmm.
Harden, maybe there's a potential for Embiid, um, to eventually maybe ask out. Not that he would, but like it's certainly
Right.
possible. And then if you're another team like the Knicks or somebody like that, right, you can definitely throw, a package, uh, Philly's way, and
Yeah.
then Philly can kind of start that rebuild. And then obviously with Lillard, right, there's going to be some interesting factors there, right? Because again, wherever he goes, there's probably going to be a couple players that follow, like I mentioned with Miami.
Yeah.
So I think those are kind of the teams to look out for, or even the Clippers, right? Let's say the Clippers get Harden, there's a chance for them, to kind of maybe add a couple of cheap options in free agency.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting if they get Harden, and then you have Westbrook and Harden together again, except this time in LA, where they're from. So that would be kind of an interesting story, um, were it to happen. But at this point, we're pretty much through most of free agency.
Right.
So now we're kind of like getting into back to more of the rookie theme stuff with the summer
Yeah.
league, um, and training camp and everything, which is ways away. But we're
Right.
we're kind of now after free agency, we're at that point in the off season where not a lot is going to be going on.
Just looking
Obviously,
out
we
for
still have those
trades.
trades.
Yep.
Yeah, except for the trades. Once those happen, we'll talk about it. But then after the trades, right? Then there won't really be much else.
Right.
Um, in terms of like actual things going on, it'll be a lot more speculative stuff at that point.
Right. More like speculative and narrative stuff too, because there's always a storyline wherever you go. Um, but yeah, I feel like the main thing to look forward to is definitely the summer league, and obviously the looming trades and pending trades that we potentially will have in the coming weeks or months. So I'm hyped. I think this is going to be a really exciting season, especially with all the new
Right.
talent coming in and all the shakeups. So that's pretty cool to see. And also some of the re-signings are pretty cool. So some teams are pretty similar. But there were some guys that moved around.
Yeah. Shout out Trace Jackson.
Yeah,
So I guess in
W.
terms of yeah, so like final prediction. So we both think Lillard's going to Miami.
Yes, I think Lillard will be
Yeah.
going to Miami.
And
I
where do
think
you
that's
think
set in
Harden
stone.
goes?
That's a tougher one.
Yeah, I think that's a tougher one because I think we initially leaned Clippers,
Yes.
but I feel like again because of with Daryl Morey, there's always a chance where he just kind of holds out and
Yeah.
waits, get a really good
So
offer like he did with Simmons. So that one's kind of harder, I think, to predict. I mean, most of the insiders were kind of leaning towards that it was going to be the Clippers. So I feel like that's probably what it will be. But
that's
at
what
the
I'm
same
thinking
time,
too.
like, I feel like that trade may take a little longer. But we'll see because the Lillard trade may take longer depending on if they need a third team, which I think they will.
Yeah, and for me, I need to see who's really biting, for the Harden trade. Like I know who's biting for Dame, obviously. We have all those names, but
Yeah, and
for the
reportedly he
Harden
has
one, it's
preferred destination
right.
as
And it's
well.
like for the Harden one, it's like we don't know. All we know is what they've put forth, and it's not a lot. So I feel like that one's more of like a developing story, if you will. So
Right.
that's my thoughts on it. But I'm thinking right now, as of right now, I would say Harden is probably going to the Clippers.
Yeah. And then I guess then we'll kind of like say biggest steal in free agency,
Yeah,
kind of, I guess like I said, to kind of just put a bow on it
sure.
before we wrap this up. Biggest steal. What do you think?
Hmm. I mean, I'm gonna be honest.
Hmm.
It's I really like Gabe Vincent to the Lakers. I really do because I didn't think he was going, to the Lakers. I hadn't heard anything about that. Um, that's a
Hadn't
good
either.
one. Um, but at the same time, having Russell Westbrook on a small deal like that, 2 years, 8 million. I feel like that's also a steal. Obviously, they didn't take him from anybody. He was on the Clippers towards the end of the last season, but to bring him back on a 2 year, $8 million deal and get the talent that he plays at, I feel like that's a steal in the literal sense, like a bargain. So I guess those are probably my two. What about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of, sort of with you. I would probably lean more towards Reeves just because,
Sure.
again, I feel like, for what he is, I feel like that's a pretty solid contract.
Right.
Um, but either way, I think you could go either way with Vincent or Reeves. So I definitely would say, those two.
I
After
just
that
like
one, it's like, huh?
I just like how, you guys basically took Gabe Vincent from Miami, he
Yeah.
left. So that's pretty I mean, that's a good pickup in my opinion.
Right. After that one, um, after that one, I don't know. I feel like the DiVincenzo one, I don't want to, I feel like I don't know if steal is the right word because it's more than I think what you would have expected, at 12.5 million a year.
I think it's just a
But I
great
just feel like,
pickup.
yeah, I just feel like that's kind of a great pickup in
Yeah.
terms of like again, from the guard spot, even though they do have a decent amount of guards, I just think he'll help them out, um, a good amount just in terms of again, what he brings on both ends of the floor,
It'll
right?
do more
He
than
figured out,
quickly.
yeah, yeah, he figured out the 3-point shooting, this year for the Warriors, right? Basically shooting almost 40%, to add on to that defense. So,
Rebounding.
that yeah, so that's kinda what I like. I think those 2 are really good ones, and then I guess, kind of probably contract that the team will regret, the most likely, again, you can name Jeremy Grant if you want,
Yep.
I suppose, but, at the same time, they're kind of in an interesting spot where it's like Portland's a small market team,
Yeah.
and, just having guys on their roster, I feel like is probably, like, the priority for them, not necessarily winning,
Right.
more so just like, "Hey, we have this name on the roster, that's making money," so obviously, you wanna see him play,
Yeah.
if you're Portland. I
They're
mean,
gonna
but
have to
I
build through
still
the draft, man, because they don't attract anybody.
exactly, yeah, 'cause they're never gonna get any big free agents,
No.
even, once they, rebuild, and they maybe, a few years down the road are really good, but, I'm trying to stay away from the Grant one
I
because I
know.
feel like
It's
that's
hard.
kind of it's one. Yeah, but, I mean, do you have any other ones, where you're like, I'm not really sold on this one. I think this is a bad contract."
Outside of that one, I mean, I guess, the Dylan Brooks one, that one is kind of rough because 4 years, 80 million to me is highway robbery. If you look at, say, a Russell Westbrook, um, the talent level I think that Russ brings is, you know, not a direct reflection of his contract. But then if you look at Dylan Brooks, it's like, okay, 4 years, 80 million is crazy, but at the same time, it is the Rockets, so it's a completely different team and a completely different situation. So I do get that. But at the same time, I'm not a fan of that deal. I think he should be getting paid a little bit less, just due to the fact that his offense and his mouth has gotten him into a lot of trouble in the past year or two. Um, Let me look around a little bit more. I'm not a fan of the Vucevic contract. I already said that. I didn't think that was worth, bringing him back. But, you at the same time, you don't want guys to walk away for free. So I understand the thinking. Still not a fan of it. Um, and that's pretty much about it for me in terms of the ugly ones.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this one isn't really ugly,
Okay,
but I also, I don't really like it as much as the Jakob Poeltl one where it was 4 years,
let me check it out.
80 million. And
Okay,
again, I don't and again, not at all a bad player. I just don't feel like he's a 20 million a year
sure.
type of guy. I mean, again, I guess you could argue, it's not really that much different from what he was making before, I
Right.
don't think. But I don't know. I just feel like 4 years,
Well,
for what he brings to the table. I don't know about that one, but I don't think it's definitely not the worst one.
right.
For sure.
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying about the center market. It's so dog water that I mean, what else can you do? I mean, and he's not a bad player, like you said. So you might as well bring him back. Since you can, because there's nobody else out there really. Everybody else is
Yeah.
gone.
Now that I'm thinking about it, Toronto might be, a team. I don't know if I would flat out have them as a loser, but I don't know.
Really?
Like
You
some
think
people,
loser?
no, I don't think I'd have them as a loser, but
Okay.
I'm kind of lukewarm
Okay.
on theirs just because I mean they lost Fred Van Vliet,
Sure.
didn't get anything for him.
Sure.
Um, and again, he's a good enough player where you
You
in
can
theory
get
should have gotten
return.
something for him.
Right.
Yeah, I mean you replaced him with Dennis Schroeder, who's fine. Um, Jakob Poeltl again, the 4-year deal. I mean, I don't like the length of it, but again, I understand it. Um, and then McDaniel's. I mean, like, what else did they really do?
Nothing. I mean, they're
Yes,
probably commencing their rebuild.
yeah. I mean, again, yeah, exactly. If they trade Siakam, and just kind of like completely restart the rebuild, maybe I'll feel different about it. I don't
Mhm.
think it was terrible, right?
Right.
Which is why I don't have them as, like I said, a flat out loser. It's definitely not to the degree of the other teams, but I feel like it's a little worse than Meh because I just don't really
Okay.
feel like they really did anything
I understand it.
of. But like at the same time, like I don't expect them to be good anyways.
Right.
So it's like,
Yeah, that's
and I
why
was, yeah,
I
I
didn't
wasn't.
really rank them because I was like, they're not going to be good. They should be starting the rebuild very soon. So I really could care less.
Yeah, and I think they're also reportedly going to give an extension to Gary Trent Jr. So
Okay.
I'm just kind of confused as to,
What's
what's
the
the deal with
direction?
giving all this money out, to all these other guys, when again, you're probably not going to be that good. I don't, it just feels kind of weird. I mean,
I
I
get
could
you.
be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I do think it was kind of a weird offseason for them. Just because, again, they
Absolutely.
still have other guys on the roster where it's like, hey, we heard so much about these guys where we thought they were going to be traded, and then they never
OG?
got traded. One of them left for nothing.
Yeah,
And
true.
now, you got to figure out what you do with the rest of the guys. What do you do with OG? What do you do with Gary Trent? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that pretty much wraps up today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Obviously we were covering, Damian Lillard and free agency, right? Winners, losers, things like that. Obviously, as we mentioned, we have one more episode, right? Before we'll be in the summer league, right? Obviously, next this upcoming Friday episode, right, will be before summer league. But by the time you see it, we'll be there. So, right, so for Monday's episode, that will be the first one where we're in Vegas.
Yep.
Again, talking about the summer league, and that's probably going to be, the majority of the topics, unless, between now and then trades happen.
Right. Stuff comes
Um,
up.
yeah, but again, we also appreciate those who came into the live stream, and hung out with us, and chatted with us. It was a lot of fun,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, especially Xander Cade, right? Hyman Roth, in addition, Moverse as well.
Yeah,
So
Moverse. Shout out Moverse.
yeah, exactly. We also appreciate, the fact that we've gotten, in the last week or so, a handful of new subscribers, right? So that's also important, and we really appreciate it in terms of helping us
Yeah.
grow that channel, as we continue to pump out that content. So, either way, thanks for listening. Have a great, 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 great weekend, and we'll see you Friday.